Hello from COP26 in Glasgow, where I'm joined by Fabian, who is the chairman of the European Platform for Sustainable Finance, and by Saich, who is the EIB's chief expert on climate change and the leading light for the institution on the issue of the EU taxonomy. Now, for many of you joining us, that name alone might be enough to trigger deep sleep or at least confusion, but we're going to try and get into that together. And I want to ask you both, first of all, when you're trying to define in this taxonomy, which is the grammar book for green finance, as it were, what does significant harm and what doesn't, how do you actually measure it? Maybe Nathan, give us a go at that first.
Well, we actually set criteria with metrics for economic activities. And so we're able to take things like climate mitigation targets and work out what the energy asset or the transport asset or the building should perform like in terms of emissions. And we set an emissions intensity threshold numerically for both substantial contribution and for do no significant harm. This can be done looking at the climate models, the 2030 targets, and the technologies that are available in each of these sectors.
And why does that matter in the context of the big discussions here at COP26, the dire warnings of the way that the planet's heating up?
Well, it matters for two reasons, because firstly, as you hear all around the COP, we need more climate finance, we need more green finance, and to really build up confidence in the markets and have more private investment, you need robust green finance, climate finance definitions. So that's the first bit. But you also hear a lot of discussion here about Paris alignment, making sure that finance flows are aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement, and do no significant harm is a very important threshold for making sure that while we're perhaps delivering on one environmental objective, we're not undermining the others. And when it comes to do no significant harm to climate change mitigation and adaptation, if you put those together, you're effectively talking about avoiding harm to the Paris goals.
I mean, how do you actually agree that everybody understands the same thing by what significant harm is and what kind of projects we can finance?
Well, there are ways to come up with a number that the experts agree on. And for example, when we identified a do no significant harm threshold for climate mitigation, we took the average emissions intensity of the European grid at the time that we set the criteria, which was 2019 and 2020. And that was around 270 grams per kilowatt hour of energy generated. And so that seemed to us to be a good level of performance. When you're above the midpoint, it is fair to say that there is a significant harm risk.
Yes.
Now, that is the magic number, or thereabouts anyway, 270, 250. Nancy, why is that number important? Because actually it's the same number that at the EIB, with our energy lending policy, we've actually pegged the kind of, you can't go over this if you want us to finance your energy project, for example.
I think it's important for two reasons. So 270 grams, we're going to get a bit techie, of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilowatt hour. It gives you an indication of the emissions for making electricity from that plant. And in the taxonomy, that's been set as a level for doing no significant harm to the temperature goals. And that is regardless of whether it's fossil fuel or non. It just basically says if you emit more greenhouse gas than this, then you are causing significant harm to the temperature goals. Now, our 250 at the EIB is very similar. It's close, 270, 250. Effectively, what they both do is they say that conventional power, like gas-fired power or coal-fired power, conventional power that's above those numbers will be causing significant harm. But the other important thing about it is it gives an incentive. It shows the way forward. Just like we indicated in our energy lending policy, if projects can, over their economic life, get under the 250 and have a credible plan to get under the 250 over their economic life, then the bank can still finance them. And it's the same thing in the taxonomy. We're trying to incentivize the transition out of significant harm. And by setting a threshold, instead of just discussing what's green, what's brown, what's needed, you're basically saying, if you're higher than this, you do need to transition that activity to a level below 270 to avoid significant harm.
I mean, actually, in a way, you've answered my next question, but some would say, why don't you just focus on the really green stuff? the under 100, for example, rather than this rather sort of neutral, I think you call it amber anyway these days.
Well, that's not as hard a question to answer in a way. We do need the substantial contribution or the green threshold, but the market knows what the green and zero carbon assets are in a way. The do no significant harm question is a bit more difficult, and we're talking a lot about transition at this COP, and people need to be very clear and explicit about how we transition assets and what level of performance is required. So in a way, the 270 gram equivalent number is dealing with a more urgent and more pressing problem.
And I guess, just finally, in a way, we will have to be even more ambitious, though. I mean, you say 250 today. 2 years' time, we're going to have to make it more demanding?
Well, certainly, if you look at the International Energy Agency's projections, they say that developed countries have to decarbonize the electricity grid, the power generation, by 2035, which is pretty soon. So indeed, all of these efforts will have to increase, and we'll have to have, falling levels. That, in fact, the taxonomy foresees a review. That's absolutely true. But I just wanted to add one more thing that I think it's important to understand. When we talk about the taxonomy, we do talk about making a substantial contribution to an environmental objective. What the do no significant harm does is it says, even if you could make a substantial contribution to one of the other objectives, if you're harming the mitigation goal, if you are above 270, then you are actually not Paris-aligned and you're not green. So if we take something like conventional gas-fired power, there's been a lot of discussion about it here at the COP, it is a lot cleaner air than coal. It is, let's face it. It makes cleaner cities, cleaner air, healthier people. Unfortunately, conventional gas is way above 270, so it's actually harming mitigation. What we need are those solutions that provide the cleaner air in cities, but are below 270, which, for example, could include very efficient combined heat and power.
Final word to you, Nathan.
Well, as you have already said, these targets and these performance thresholds will get tighter over time. We already know that under the Fit for 55 targets for 2030, we're looking at an energy intensity average of 100 grams equivalent per kilowatt hour by 2030. So unless you can bring down that level of harm right now, you're going to have no chance of meeting those criteria by 2030. So it really is critical that we're bringing those performance levels down now.
Yeah. Thank you both very much for helping us crunch those absolutely essential numbers. For now, that's all from us at COP26. Bye for now.